Hey gals and guys, it's your host Phil Larson, and this is your motivational high five on risk. Let's do this. Welcome to your motivational high five, the super simple podcast show that is aimed to give you motivation in around 5 minutes. For more information on who I am and why this podcast exists, go back and listen to just one podcast before this, the very first podcast. Or check out storyshop.tv/podcast. Risk. I've lived so much of my life letting fear control what I do and don't do. A lot of it because I would weigh the risk and go, oh, that is too great. And honestly, it didn't take much for something to be too great. It's not necessarily in my personality, the way that I'm made to be attracted to risk. And so I've found a lot of comfort in avoiding it. One of the things that is risky right now for me is this very podcast, and it scares me. And when I think about this podcast, I think about the quote, "You never know until you try." And that makes sense with risk, because what's scary about risk, for me at least, I can speak for myself, is not knowing. But you never know until you try. So if the scary part is not knowing, how do we get over the scary part? By trying. And we try, and then what? We fail? But even if that worst case scenario comes true and you do fail, is that bad? Is that all that bad? Is there a way to redeem it, to make failure worth it? You know, when I think about risk, we often put the words risk and reward together, so that if we risk and we succeed, then we get our reward. Well, what if you don't succeed? Because more often than not, I'm willing to bet, when you risk, and the higher the risk, the more likely you are to fail than succeed. So what if we risk and we fail, and our response to that failure is, so what now? And the answer to that question is, okay, how can it be redeemed? And I have a funny story. We live near the campus of the university that I went to, and practicing on the soccer fields was the soccer team. And one of their soccer balls flew over the fence and into the area I was walking my dog. And I used to play soccer. It was across a road and over a fairly tall fence. And so I decided to take a risk. Instead of easily throwing the ball over, I decided I'm going to kick it. And all the other soccer team, they were still practicing, except the goalie saw that I was going to kick it over. And we kind of signaled to each other, and I ran after the ball, and I kicked it. And I think I hit the ground before I hit the ball, because the ball lifted maybe off the ground a couple of inches and slammed into the fence. And I just laughed at myself. I ran over to the ball, which was now rolling in the road. I then just punted it over. I risked, and I failed. It was a blatant fail. So now I am kind of left asking, what was that good for? What's the failure? How can I redeem it? And the answer to that, guys, is here. I'm using it as kind of a springboard of this message. And finally, the best way, I think, to redeem risk is to try and try again. So though you may have failed, the skill of perseverance, and I believe it is a skill that you have to train and hone through failure and mistakes, has been developed in the meantime for that one time you do succeed. And when you do succeed, it's awesome. So there's this guy, Alex Barker, and he has a great podcast. It's called the 66-Day Experiment. I reached out to him, and I told him about my idea for this podcast. And this is what he had to say about it.
I like your idea. It's kind of like a mesh of different ideas. What's the worst thing that could happen? To me, the worst thing is you don't get any listeners. And that's impossible. That will not happen. Someone will find your podcast and listen to it. I can guarantee it. So the worst thing in my mind is that you don't take action on this, and that 6 months from now, you regret not taking action.
So when you risk, you will fail. But sometimes the biggest failure is not risking at all. And so here's that time in the podcast where we start to tell ourselves some positive things so that they become more powerful and override the negative narratives of our lives. If you believe that you are worth positive things, and maybe even that you don't, but you want to believe that you're worth positive reinforcement, I want you to do this with me. I want you to look at yourself. I have my phone up and I'm looking at myself on selfie mode, and I want you to tell yourself a good thing that I'm going to lead you. I want you to say it in first person. I want you to say this: I can risk failure because I am worth success. And that's it. Good job. I want to remind you that you have power over your personal narrative, but no one else does. In order to get goodness out of your life, it's got to start with you.